Good morning. How are you? So last week I did this little youth sermonette in half the time. So I think this week I'll do it in double the time, take twice as much. No one's laughing. Thank you. So what I would love to do is break down something that stood out to me from this chapter 14. This week we had a pastoral staff meeting and we focused on, what theme stood out for you or for you? And for me, it was the singular sentence, I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you. There's a poet I really enjoy, Malcolm Guite, who lives over in England. And he says that Christianity is not a propositional religion, it's a prepositional. So don't focus too much on the propositions, what the statements are about what you should believe. Pay attention to the prepositions, with, toward, within, above, below, beside. All of these prepositions are really important because they're inherently about relationship. Christianity is a relational religion. So this past week, I quickly drove down and visited my mom on Thursday night. And we had salmon and a salad. It was really nice. But she told me really briefly, she's like, yeah, your dad, he was a big softy. I was like, wait, what? This is a guy that used to be 6'2", a bearded fisherman, was a softy. And I was reminded of a story that when I was just a little younger than that picture you saw earlier about being in red overalls, my dad used to work on the big rig, the big fishing boats that you might have seen on the Discovery Channel. And he was a welder, and so he would often go down into the bowels of the boat and fix any leaks or weld things that needed welding. But he would leave me in a bassinet in the car because it would be unsafe to bring an infant onto a big rig where there's welding happening, right? And so every so often he'd be down in there welding, and then another fisherman would come up to him and say, hey, Blue Whale, because that was his nickname, your baby's crying. And then he'd drop everything and then run up and out of the boat and go over to the truck where I was in the small child seat. There's something really tender about that story, that this gruff fisherman with a beard who wore flannel like all year long, weird, would run out to the crying baby. Christianity is interesting because, yes, we sometimes we focus on the propositions, but there's a story that happens with the gospel. There's something, good news comes to us in the stories that are present in the Bible. That's why we keep reading these stories. Even though they're ancient and maybe from the Bronze Age, they carry good news to us. And in this passage, the good news that stood out to me was, I won't leave you as orphans, I will come to you. Isn't that lovely? Now, last week I said that let's talk about how the gospel fulfills core fundamental needs in every one of us. Last week was about belonging. Well, this week is about being the children of God. And we have this push and pull between two identities, and maybe you've noticed it within yourself. You might have said to yourself, I am the child of God, and that's wonderful. But on our worst days, we say to ourselves, I am the orphan of God. God doesn't notice when I cry. God doesn't come close to me when I'm crying. And so we oscillate, we bounce back and forth between, am I the orphan of God or am I the beloved child of God? And Jesus says we are the beloved children of God. I think there's really something deep about our parents. Our parents are the first representation of God to us. I was fortunate enough to have really great parents, but even my parents fall short. And I think there's something redemptive that Jesus tells us to call God Daddy. The word Abba means daddy. Jesus is all about this relational Christianity, not a propositional one that helps us to realize God is our daddy, that we are not the orphans of God. We are the children of God. And that helps us to live very differently. Because when I think about the two identities that we can push and pull between, being the children of God or being the orphans of God, if you have an understanding, if you believe deep in your bones that you are the orphan of God, you might go around this world with despair or distrust of other people. You might have a lack of joy on your face because on a fundamental level, you know no one is looking out for you. Or at least maybe you believe that. But then the gospel comes along and it fulfills this core need within all of us, and it tells us there's someone who's watching out for you. And that's the balance that we live between. Am I believing today that I am the child of God or something else? Now, what does the church have to do? Well, to all of you young folks and even you older folks with still young hearts, the church exists. And there's probably multiple reasons why the church exists, but in this short homily today from me, I'm going to say that the church exists to love those of us who think we are the orphans of God into realizing and believing that we are actually the children of God. The church exists to love with open arms, and I love that. But why do we love with open arms? Because Jesus says, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Amen.